Cool. So when we think about visualizing service design, I think today what I'm going to talk to you about is visualizing service design. I'll start off with a few of my thoughts around service design tools and visualization and how it all sort of meshes together, and then I'll go into that actual case study, and then we'll have some time for questions as well. So when we think about visualizing service design, I think the first question you've got to ask is, why are we actually visualizing things? Like, what are we actually trying to achieve? I mean, firstly, when you're trying to contain thousands of data points and information on different teams and systems and all the different processes in our brain, it's extremely high cognitive load. And when you're trying to communicate that to stakeholders, or you're trying to bring teams together to get an understanding of a service and to show what's happening front of stage, back of house, and whatnot, it's an extremely arduous task to try and explain that verbally or with just simply text. So one of the things, obviously, as you know, through design is visualizing it is an immensely beneficial approach. Really, it allows us to create clarity, to give visual context to what we're doing, and ultimately to communicate it. And it allows us the opportunity to actually tell a story. Humans fundamentally, inherently love stories. I love stories. I think one of the big things about me as a design professional is I'm very, very big on storytelling, and it's something I really work on, because if you want to have one of the key things about design, and when you're creating any kind of artifact or using any kind of tool, is you're working towards an outcome and you want to actually have impact. If you can actually tell it as a story, it'll have lasting effect on people. If you just take them and say, all right, guys, here's a service blueprint, we've got front of house, back of house, system, tools, processes, you're going to lose people after a minute. And one thing I'll sort of call out a bit later on is that a lot of the time as service designers, when you go into an organization, you might be working by yourself as the lone service designer. You might be in a team of 10 service designers, or you may only be a few of you, but or you might even be embedded in a program as the lone service designer, or working in a pair. And a lot of the time, these stakeholders or people you work with, they'll have varying levels of understanding of what service design is. Right now, I actually completely forgot the intro part about who I am. So everyone's probably wondering, like, why is this guy talking without any kind of context? I'm the lead service designer and strategic designer at Australia Post. So it's a very interesting time that Chetan's engaged me, because it allows me to actually sort of talk a lot more about what I'm going through as a service designer when I'm entering a new organization. What's interesting for me joining Australia Post, I spent about 4 years jumping between service design, user experience design. I had a career prior to that in project management and asset management, risk management. I jumped around a lot, so I've actually had a lot of different sort of careers. And for me, what happened early on was I studied psychology, studied criminology. I was, loved trying to understand human behavior. And I also loved computers and systems and technology. And so for me, it was a real dilemma when I went to university to decide, what am I going to do, computer science or psychology? It wasn't until many years later, working in different industries, that I actually discovered design through a friend. He's now at Google as a lead user experience researcher. Was that there was a career out there where you can actually get paid to design experiences for people. Like, you actually cared about what people felt and thought, and you didn't have to actually be a psychologist to care about that, but you would get paid to actually design things for people that actually added value. And for me, that just sounded like better than owning the Willy Wonka factory. I don't know. And I love chocolate, so for me, it was a really exciting transition to move into this. So I've had a little bit of a different journey, and you'll probably meet a lot of service designers and people who come from all sort of walks of life, and sort of land there. So I've recently joined Australia Post in January, entering the organization, and I got hired as lead service designer. However, I guess the interesting thing for me is there was once a service design team at AusPost, and there isn't anymore. So what I'm tasked with is actually setting up the whole service design function. So not only am I leading a team right now, but I'm spending a lot of time just planning and workshopping and trying to understand, how do we actually create an impactful service design function at Australia Post. I didn't know that I'd be actually creating this whole function from scratch when I joined. But when you think about it, like, Australia Post is an enormous organization. They're basically unparalleled in Australia in the logistics industry. So it's it's really exciting and at times really daunting, I guess, experience to be starting up a whole function from scratch and working with meeting with stakeholders and trying to understand from them, like, what are the key problems and pain points of this organization? Like, what are the challenges we're facing? And starting to build up those relationships and to then sort of map out how we can have an impact. So I'm actually officially starting week 5 now, so I can talk to you a little bit more about that. But that's kind of my journey so far. So I'll sort of jump straight back into this and talking about storytelling. So that was my little segue there. So when we think about storytelling and visualization, half of our brain is either indirectly or directly devoted to actually processing visual information. So it's fair to say we're very visually orientated creatures. And so when we have any kind of support or visual support, it really aids comprehension. Um, Quite often I have experiences working with different stakeholders in organization, and we're trying to describe a problem, and one person's trying to find the right word for it, and we're just back and forth. And when as designers, we're in the room, we just often just sort of say, is this something you can draw? Like, can we visualize this so we can all kind of create alignment around that? And that's one of the most impactful things. So fundamentally, as designers or service designers or researchers, we're sense makers and storytellers. And I think that's a really important thing I really want to convey, because when we visualize data, we can actually arrange it, we can rearrange it, we can create meaning from it, we can actually start to see the relationships and connections, we can create clusters, we can create themes, and from that we can actually start to identify any kind of common categories and if there's any sort of patterns there, and then from there we can inform insights. And once we've got insights, that's what actually unlocks the design opportunities. And again, so I'll really dive into this and sort of show you the process of it. So just before I actually start to show you a bit of the sort of the AGL work, some sort of final points I really want to sort of communicate, and this is something I really try to emphasize with my people and my team, is that we have a lot of tools. All of them have various purposes, but it's really important you understand that you're choosing the right one for a particular need. And to think and to help you land on that, it's really important to be outcome focused, not output focused. I mean, you can, you guys will go through this course and you'll be able to make these sort of beautiful service blueprints, but sometimes the organization, the kind of challenge or the problem you're trying to solve might not need the service blueprint. So it's really about asking, what are we trying to achieve out of this? Like, what is the outcome? Is it to make a system easier to use, or is it to understand organizational challenges? For example, we might have an overloaded call center and people basically start to give up on trying to call us to raise their problems with us, and then suddenly we're unaware of like what are the problems. People normally call up to say, hey, this isn't working, but if people give up, we won't have this sort of channel of information, and then by maybe by mapping that out, you can start to get some exposure to it. So I'm unfamiliar if you guys have heard of this, but it's the jobs to be done framework. And so when you think about that, it's fundamentally do you need a drill or do you need a hole in the wall? People buy a drill to put a hole in the wall. They don't buy a drill just because it's something cool and you get to sort of hold it down, it spins around, it sounds cool. It's, you want that hole in the wall so you can hang up a picture. That's the outcome. That's the job you have to do. And so that's another kind of mindset that I think is really helpful to think about all of this, because there are so many tools, and when you guys are in service design working there in 5-10 years, there'll be new tools that come up, and you'll be met invariably with the question of like, why would you use this tool? What do you use it for? And if you can start to think about that in that kind of, I guess, outcome focused manner, you'll be a lot better off. So I did touch on earlier before about stakeholders, they may not know. So really it's about focusing on the impact. Sometimes, the simplest tool to get the job done and to communicate something is what a stakeholder will need. So think about that. I started when I was sort of planning out this kind of little presentation here. I don't know if you guys have seen this sort of poster before, but it's a nice little selection of the favorite service design tools and different processes you can do. And I thought what I'll do is I'll start like putting a little star on all the different kinds of tools and techniques that I used in this example. And what was interesting is I actually just, as I was going through this, I found that you know what, I think I used nearly every single one of these. And so I think the reason I put this in here is I really want to communicate that I'm going to show you a service blueprint, but it's more than just this map that you create. There's so many processes and steps that go towards it, and there's a reason why we chose a service blueprint. And there's a lot of ways to get information and to understand a problem. So we did hypotheses, journey mapping. We did a lot of stakeholder interviews. We had an alignment workshop to kick things off. A lot of these techniques were used, and I'll show you some of them. So the AGL case study. What we were tasked with this project was in 2019, AGL more or less committed to investing in the future of energy storage. And so what they wanted to do was to start rolling out residential batteries, so solar batteries for customers so that they can house the solar. So one of the key problems, key challenges in the solar industry market is people get solar panels, and what happens is if they don't have a very good rebate, so what happens is they'll get like a compensation for feeding the energy they don't use back into the grid. So they'll be pulling in solar energy into their solar panels. Anything that the house isn't immediately using gets fed back into the grid. So it's actually a lot of energy that they don't really get the opportunity to utilize themselves and to be more carbon friendly, reduce greenhouse emissions, and more self-sustaining. So the solution there that has been popularized by Elon Musk's Tesla company is a residential battery storage option, and that allows customers to any solar energy they're not using goes and fills up one of these 2,000 kilowatt sort of batteries. So as you can sort of see here from the diagram, you've got the Tesla battery, the sun comes through. I probably should just talk to the diagram, would have been a lot easier to communicate, talking about impact and outcomes. So you can see the solar energy comes into the solar panels. Any excess goes into the solar battery. Anything, if they didn't have a battery, would just get fed all the way back into the grid. Now, so they'll get some compensation for that, but for a lot of customers, that's just money lost. It's energy that they harness that they don't really get to use, and it just goes back into the grid. Another concept that AGL was proposing in order to make the residential batteries more, I guess, palatable and exciting and interesting to customers was to introduce this concept called the virtual power plant. Now, bear with me as I'm explaining all of this. I went through all this kind of information my first week of this project, and it will bust your brain. So don't be alarmed if it's just not all sitting in your brain properly, because it is very complex stuff. I don't have a technical background, so for me it was, I had to work with experts to help understand this. So with a virtual power plant, the whole idea is that people can basically join this, I guess, kind of like community of batteries, where what would happen is rather than feeding energy back into the grid, they can sort of share this energy. And another key feature of that is that AGL, in order to stabilize the grid, which would, when we talk about grid stabilization, you think about blackouts in some states. Some of you might have lived in South Australia and Adelaide, which was the pilot for this project. They have some of the highest energy bills in the world. Well, they did. They've actually, since they've been introducing batteries, it's gotten cheaper. But they have some of the highest energy bills in the world. And it's because the demand is so much higher than the actual supply of energy. So what often happens in summer, and that has happened traditionally, is that on these really hot summer days, when everyone turns on their air conditioner, it more or less calls a blackout. And so part of their grid management is that they have to shut down sections of Adelaide from energy. So people are going through these blackouts. It's a really terrible experience for customers, or not just customers, sorry, it's a terrible experience for the people living there. So the state government has been seeking solutions to, how can we overcome this energy shortage? And one of the ideas is that it's, very sunny in South Australia, was to introduce batteries so that all these people with solar panels could start to harness energy. Very, very complex concept, and AGL's trying to sell it. If you can imagine how many words I've used to sort of explain this, and for a lot of you, it may not even really be resonating. This was the customer problem, the customer challenge we had to try to communicate to customers, and part of what we were tasked with was, what do customers think of this? Like, do they understand it? Do they want it? What is their perception of it? If they did want it, what would they need from it? And then as well as exploring, as far as battery solutions, what is the perception of the market out there? We did have some market research data there, but what do customers think about it at this point in time? And as a little side note though, with research, and research is an incredibly big part of service design and design processes in general, is constantly, I guess, probing the market to understand what the sentiment is, and that changes over time. Maybe when electric cars first came out, I'm just making this up for example, it's not necessarily true. People thought electric cars were, didn't work, they're a hoax. Why would I buy them? After a year, people start to see that they work, and people start to build trust, and the sentiment starts to shift towards a positive perspective. So research is something that is a continuous process, and you're always trying to update your knowledge of what's happening in the market and the landscape and what your competitors are doing. So what they tasked us with, beyond those key learning objectives that I articulated to you, was they wanted to understand, as they're creating a brand new service, selling out batteries, having them installed, going through that whole process. They wanted the organization wanted us to help them understand what the ideal future state experience would look like for customers end to end when they're purchasing a battery for their whole home solar setup, and as well as explore that value proposition of orchestration. So as I touched on, we wanted to learn about the customer needs, the goals, the behaviors, expectations, mindsets, everything that goes into the customer's thought processes from start to finish when they're thinking about buying a battery, and they're asking themselves questions. Is this right for me? How do I know if it's going to benefit me? Is it the right option for me? What do I get out of it fundamentally? And so I was talking before about like trying to understand, I guess, the outcome. So there was a lot of negotiation between our team and the organization around what we could offer them. And the problem they came to us with was we don't, as an organization, we don't really know how to roll out this service, how to start it up, how to really get it going. We've got so many different teams involved, and we know we've got like legacy systems, we've got old data storage systems. We don't really have like a customer support team set up. Guys, help us. Like, what do we need to do to get started? Can you help sort of show us where we should be focusing? So I guess fundamentally what they were seeking from us was to help them prioritize, like, what should they be focusing on? What should they be working on? What are actually the challenges we need to focus on? What are our strengths? What do we have today? What can we work with? And what is something we can start to aim for in the near future? So when we think about that, all these different sort of teams and functionalities and this ginormous program group that we assembled of different experts, we're thinking like, engineers with content, website designers, user experience designers, service designers, you've got business analysts, you've got so many different I guess industries that are involved, on different skill sets that are involved to create this, which is something you work very closely with in service design. It's really much about unifying those, aligning those, and bringing those together. And it's about creating, I guess, a single vision and visualizing that around this is the experience we are all working towards and we're trying to achieve. We all, in our respective skill sets and roles, contribute to that in different ways. But with something like a service blueprint, we can visualize it and we can start to see the relationships. And we can see, for example, how a customer service team has a relationship with the logistics team, and then the manufacturing team and the warehousing teams, and all these things that it'd be very hard to think about if you didn't visualize it. And so with that, with each slice and vertical of the blueprint, you can actually start to look at what's required to enable that experience. And I think fundamentally, I talk about service design as, in the simple terms, service design is, what is it like, what is required from an organization to enable a customer experience. So it's very customer focused, but it's also very internally focused. So as an example, I'm really glad I actually joined to see a service blueprint right at the end there, because it gives me an indication that you guys have been working with this. So I don't really need to go into any detail, except for the fact that I put this sort of template here from Nielsen Norman Group, just to sort of show that the kinds of I get high level some of the activities we were doing at some of these stages. So for example, the customer journey, we're using customer research and secondary research synthesis. When we're looking at the backstage actions, it's a lot of stakeholder interviews. It's a lot of validating that, getting experts in the room and saying, hey, what does this look like? We've made this assumption that SAP does this. Is this right? And they might say, yeah, SAP, but it's also this and this and this. And we'll adjust our post-it notes and update the knowledge. So really, the service blueprint is a living, breathing document. It's not something you just sort of map out and go, cool, done. It's a lot of engagement. It's a lot of facilitation. It's talking to experts and different stakeholders and saying, and as more or less acknowledging, I'm a service designer. I'm not an expert in battery orchestration or any of this. I've got a high level understanding that battery holds energy and it does this or that. But what I'm taking a look at is that macro view, and how do we enable this experience when we visualize all these different components. So let me give you insight into, I guess, how we tackle this, because the service blueprint, when you know what you're doing and stuff like that, I guess it's a fairly straightforward process. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of activities that go into this. The first thing that's absolutely paramount with when we think about this 5-week design sprint is, so we planned it out, 5-week sprint, and the first week is prioritizing the kicking off the project and co-designing. So we kick off the workshop. We have basically the entire project group there, or representatives, and we're discussing the sprint plan. We're talking about the roles, responsibilities, ways of working. Ways of working could be things like, how do we communicate or share documents? Like, are we talking on Teams? Are we talking on Slack? Where do we go to for, what is the source of truth? Who are we supposed to speak to make these decisions? And these are all really really important things that need to get done, like, upfront. If you don't have those kinds of things outlined, and you don't have like clear lines of communication and ways of working, it can be really hard to get anything going. You need a data set, for example. You want to understand what are the problems in the call center, and if you don't know who to talk to in the organization, or that person's not talking to you because you haven't formed a relationship, it's very hard to make progress. It'll literally be a blocker. So we understood that the organization had a lot of knowledge and assumptions about what this ideal future state experience could look like, but it's really important that we get everyone together in a workshop to basically get all that expertise out onto post-its, map it out. Map it out on the wall, and get us to really align around. Okay, so everyone, we've got 50 people here. we're hearing these are the common problems. It seems like the big theme that's forming here is that we need to digitize this experience, and that's what's going to enable a beautiful customer experience. So by looking at those different sort of use cases and agreeing on what are the important critical moments that matter, and key steps, it allows us to move forward as a group. Otherwise, we're moving forward with assumptions. Everyone's got a different idea of what we're moving, but with this, we can actually align and basically kill the inertia and make forward progress. So that was day 2. Day 3 is about, okay, we've done these workshops. We pulled some stuff out of this. We understand that, here's some of the solutions the business has come up with. For example, one of the hypotheses was orchestration is really complex. Let's make some kind of visual aid, like, for example, a storyboard. Let's show that to customers and see how they respond to it. And the hypothesis there was orchestration is complex, but if we can find a way to communicate it clearly, customers will be receptive to it. And so that was, for example, is one of the outputs of that. So we came up with got everyone to sort of prototype, come up with different ideas and solutions. And from there, what we started doing as a service designers is planning, I guess, the recruitment, getting all the sort of research planned. And for us, what we did is we actually took those prototypes from the organization that they sort of came up with and co-created, and sort of iterated on them and cleaned them up a little bit as something we can actually take and put in front of customers. So week 2, we flew out to Adelaide, did some interviews in their homes, contextual interviews, super valuable exercise. Obviously, COVID really makes that difficult now, but with contextual inquiries, it's immensely beneficial because you get to see, I guess, the life and perspective of these end users directly through their eyes. Like, you go in their home, you see how they make sense of things. For example, we had one participant, I think he was like 72 years old, so passionate about energy, and he came inside and like we sort of had some chats to him about like the research and what his expectations are from that from a battery experience. He said, "Oh, look, can you come in here?" He took us into, his office, and he's got like different clippings and newspaper articles of everything that's going on. And I can see in his favorites, like all the different sort of energy websites he refers to and how he makes sense of the world. So you don't get that kind of insight if you bring someone into a lab. When you go into like the context that they operate from and make decisions, it's incredibly insightful. So from that, we learned that, he has a particular website he goes to. He has systems for doing things. He had a spreadsheet for managing all his information. And from that, the insight we get from that, once we start to see it across a lot of customers, is that there isn't really a tool available, for example, for customers to track their energy usage and their costings. And so for us, that starts to emerge as a theme, as an opportunity for us to design for. And it was something we weren't aware of before. And it's something that, you only pick up through things like contextual inquiries. So we did six interviews with people, went to their homes, drove around Adelaide over a few days, came back to Melbourne, did some synthesis, got all the data out, put it on the walls, then had another co-design sessions. So more or less, sorry, I should actually add, with the synthesis, one thing we do, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with like walking the walls. So basically, as we start to get all our research up on the wall and making clusters and post-it notes, while it's still in that very early draft embryonic stage, and not something that's pretty, we actually bring our stakeholders in and start to have those conversations with them and say, hey, look, this is what we've actually been learning. As you can see, let's see, I might go to, yeah, let's skip ahead a little bit, just for, as you can see, for example, we're starting to form these clusters and these themes, and we're really starting to see some strong themes around, for example, like my handwriting is terrible, but this person's saying, let's find one where I can actually read it. Yeah, for example, rebound anxiety. We start to share that with the stakeholders early on, and start to share what we're learning, and sort of start to get those kind of findings socialized. So we had another co-design session after that, where we more or less came and said, okay, so from the research, these are the key things we're learning from it. These are the key things customers care about. These are their expectations from an experience like this. For them, the most important thing is that they need to, for example, they need to understand the value of a battery. All of you, if you think about it, the question you're going to ask, if I ask you, would you get a solar battery? The questions you're going to have to ask yourself is, well, why would I? Like, what value is there in it? Is it something that's right for me? Like, do I need it? And so for all these people, there's a research process that they have to undertake. They have to go out and go, okay, they have to ask questions like, okay, so if I get a battery, what do I need? Oh, I need a minimum 12 kilowatt solar system. I need to be in a sunny location. I can't really be in in a really cold climate in like Norway. It's not exactly maybe the best choice of technology. So we came back, shared all the research. From there, we then took utilized those updated learnings, had a look at our prototypes, and said, okay, we're gonna go back out to customers in a more lab-based environment, Adelaide this time, and we want to retest our learnings. We want to be able to drill down a little bit more to try and understand a few things. And then from there go back and test it again. And then week 4, we come back, we synthesize all these findings, all this research again, and when we start to map out the interview, map out the blueprint. And when we're mapping out the blueprint, it's as I said, it's a process of getting stakeholders to come in, have a look what we're doing, validating it, us just back and forth asking questions, getting experts like the chief energy consultant, different engineering managers, anyone who sort of needs to enable this experience, which we'll go into. So to kick off the project, I just wanted to illustrate another little artifact we used. When we're having our workshops and we're talking about how we're solving this, we felt it was appropriate to bring up a persona. The project group we were working with, I'd say about 50% of them didn't have much digital experience, so they weren't familiar with design. So for us, like what we heard a lot from a lot of these stakeholders was they'd say things like, oh, well, I don't know why you guys didn't ask me. I know what the customers want, or they said they want this. Oh, we know this already. We don't need to do research. So what was important for us is to bring a persona into it, something that the stakeholders can connect to and see that, a reminder essentially that we're actually designing for humans at the end of this. These are people that need to benefit from this, and it makes it I guess, a more tangible sort of experience. So for example, this is a persona that we gathered from looking at a lot of the market research data that AGL had done. We knew that there were some assumptions that a typical customer who would want a battery is someone more senior. They look at batteries as almost like a retirement option. They want to reduce their energy costs. So they're trying to simplify things, and so a battery feels right for them. And then we look at, some of the barriers. It's a complicated landscape, energy. So the energy literacy isn't very high. So if it's not simple, it's not clear, they're probably not going to be interested in this product. For them, they're keeping spreadsheets. So they are looking at things down to the cent. So they want to make sure that it's actually a worthwhile investment. And they don't want that. There's what we found was a lot of anxiety around organized or AGL and energy companies using their battery for their own profit. So there's a bit of anxiety around that. So we had to be very careful around what we communicate to customers. So I sort of went over everything at sort of a high level, but so I'll probably just sort of skip through some of these. But as you can see, we're kicking off, we're co-designing, we're prototyping, getting all kinds of stakeholders never done design before to start, like, for a lot of them, they're like saying, well, I've never really drawn, I don't really draw. And it's like, it's okay. Just do what you can to communicate your idea. And we'll be able to support you. So yeah, another call out that I'd make is that in the project kickoff, we worked on some how might we problem statements. So when we're thinking about these concepts that we're trying to design and co-create, we need something that can align and orient the stakeholders around. So to think about, to have a very clear vision of what we're trying to solve for. So for example, how might we clearly explain the benefits and downsides of orchestration to build trust and encourage customers to purchase a battery with AGL? Another example is how might we digitize? So headset just died. How might we digitize the installation experience so that customers know what to expect throughout each stage of the process? And so we had these 4 how might we statements that we fielded in the workshop, and people were designing concepts around those. From there, once we had those concepts sort of mapped out, everyone had time to sort of present them back. And then we got them to dot vote to more or less get the group to sort of dot vote and basically choose the idea that we think has the most value in achieving one of these how might we statements. So as you can see, I think like with the theme of visualization, you find that everything you use ultimately is more beneficial to find a way to visualize it if you can. Week 2, we talked about the contextual inquiry. So we're going into doing ethnographic studies. We're going into Adelaide, going to people's homes. Just an example, I want to show you some of the things we showed them. Really low fidelity prototypes. Given the pace of the sprint we're doing, we're not trying to make a really polished end product. You'll find that the rougher it is, the more inviting it is towards feedback. If you have something that's really polished, people are worried they might offend you. And also, it's more or less we want to do it's almost like the minimal viable effort to actually achieve an outcome, and that outcome is to really, how can we communicate an idea or a concept. So you can see here something I came up with was, you can't really read the font, but this is a storyboard that we explored. And the intention behind that was to show how orchestration works. So how these virtual power plants work. So if the customer has a battery and they're part of this program, what happens? How do they interact with things? Like, what's their involvement in it? And so we thought of a storyboard. Let's just see if we can quickly communicate this idea with illustrations. And our hypothesis was, if we can communicate it effectively, then obviously we're going to increase clarity and people will be more equipped to make a decision when it's right for them. So we knew that the barrier was comprehension. So we had to find a way to break down that comprehension to then understand what is the sentiment towards this. You see some other sort of screens. We made like that digital, more or less, process of purchasing the battery. Really simple mock-ups. This is with like Balsamic. I used Sketch for this. And I used our design system library to basically leverage all these assets. So for me, really easy. I didn't personally don't spend a lot of time like polishing up crazy prototypes or anything like that. For me, I love working in that exploratory early stage where I just need to be able to communicate an idea early, and then there's other design teams who will sort of polish that up. So that's more my space. So if any of you are like me, when you first started design, you're thinking, oh, I'm like really not strong at like drawing and crazy pictures. And if I'm a designer, I'm supposed to be an amazing drawer. You don't have to be. You just have to be an effective communicator. And there's things you can do to learn this. Like, for example, as I said, I just leveraged the assets in the library. I mean, look, I won't lie, I did draw that. I did draw some of these things, which is maybe why you can't understand them. Just an example as well. I just wanted to show some of the artifacts as we go through this. These are more or less like the persona templates, the customer interview templates. Obviously, I've obfuscated their faces for privacy reasons, but from each customer that we interviewed, we went with an approach of just getting some general information about them, different memorable quotes they've had, memorable I guess points for them. Like one of them said, like, oh, I would never buy something from AGL. And so for us, that's like something really important to note. And so if you can sort of visualize this, we've got all these different sort of customer boards here. We had this entire wall mapped out with a service blueprint. We had all the different sort of customer sheets on another wall. We had all insights everywhere. So when I talk about walking the walls, we're literally thinking about a cluster, like a little crowd of people, and starting from the beginning of the journey. And if you remember what I talked about earlier, it's about storytelling. If I start to create a connection with the people we're designing for, and in this case it was Robert and Mary, different ages, like you can sort of see that most of them are in their late 50s or 60s. When we create that connection, it facilitates a far better understanding for the organization to understand, oh yeah, like executives sometimes can forget that we're actually serving people at the end of the day, that Australia Post is to help the mail services of Australia, and AGL was to power the homes and create a greener future. So it's very important to keep that human connection. So yeah, went back into the lab. We iterated on those concepts earlier, and took that lab interviews, synthesized everything in the following week. One thing I want to call out, I'm not sure if you guys are sort of familiar with this. There's so many different ways to work with your affinity mapping and clustering, like you can see here, but we went with a rose, thorn, bud type of approach. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it's sort of pretty standard sort of technique. But rose is reflecting the positive sentiments, thorn is the negative, and then bud is the green, which is opportunities. Like, for example, a customer might say, oh geez, it'd be really good if if I never had to go to my front lawn to get the newspaper, it just ended up on my front desk. When people start to talk about that, we can start to see there's a need or something that someone's expressing. And if we start to hear that enough, we can think, you know what, there's a really high demand for a particular, there's an unmet need here that we can solve for. Other benefit of using this rosebud thorn when you're clustering like this, I will say I haven't really seen this as a like a consistent approach anywhere, but we found it quite popular in AGL and worked for us. You can start to see through like we talk about visualizing, right? You think about the coloring and groups. We can see a lot of blue there. Blue's negative. So when we were mapping out the experience for customers, like the current state, you can see that for some of these fields, like I now understand what I said here. I need to be educated. A lot of it is green and blue, and so for customers, they're speaking a lot about like a need that's not really met. Or a nice to have. There wasn't really anything there that they're saying like, oh, AGL does a fantastic job of communicating this. And so you start to see these merging themes that are really strong in like a dimension of color that really speak volumes and say, this is a really big problem. So then the fifth week was mapping and the recommendations. So when I talk about walking the walls, you can see in this bottom photo, I'm with one of my co-leads when we were walking this through. We were showing some very early stakeholders as, just some of the early thinking that's going into this and arming them with the insights. With the anticipation that in the following week, we're going to do a big showcase, big town hall, I felt like I was actually on tour because I went around the organization for about 6 months sharing this work and showcasing it. And like one of the key things that the stakeholders loved was it was such a visually powerful artifact. And I'll show you what the final output sort of looked like that we went through. But once we started to walk through, stakeholders through what this is about, what it all means, it allowed them to form a connection with that customer and then start to visualize what's happening at a system level, what's happening at a tools level, what's happening at a process level. And the whole process in and of itself was inherently educational. There were stakeholders, like for example, engineers, like we're all guilty of having our biases and sort of being locked into our own little slice of the problem to solve. But as service designers, we're really encouraged trying to look at it really macro, like the whole picture, the whole end-to-end thing. And so, for example, some engineers might not even think about the warehousing teams or these other components, and they might have a very loose relationship to it and be unaware of it, knowing that if they optimize some of their own processes or some of their own ways of working, then it might have enormous benefits upstream. So this is the raw version of the blueprint, and then I'm going to dive into, I guess, a more digital version. So I won't really spend too much time on this because it's far more illegible than an actual final blueprint. But what I've done is I've kind of pasted over some post-it notes just to sort of explain the layers. And I think you're all quite familiar with the service blueprint, but our approach to this one was at the top we had the event level. So for example, we know that the first stage of even considering a battery is to shop around. If you're going to purchase any kind of product, most people will just go and Google, for example, I went and got a Samsung Fold 3 and I really didn't look deep enough into the reviews. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have bought it. But in either case, I went and looked at reviews. I had a look at it. The first few pages looked really good. And I was like, yeah, look, this phone seems what I want. Happy with it. So you're shopping around. The next stage is, you're like, okay, using the example of the battery, they're trying to understand the different batteries. They're exploring, they're researching, they're comparing. They get a quote. They then decide, okay, you know what, this is for me. I'm going to sign up. They'll initiate a warranty. They'll go and set up. They'll get confirmation. AGL will send them a welcome pack and say, you're amazing. You're buying a battery from us. Fantastic. Best decision of your life. They'll then go and the next stage will be installing it. They'll then go in this next event level, they'll check in. For example, you've got a battery several months down, you want to see how it's performing. So what would that look like? Would you have to go and actually physically walk and look at the battery? Or ideally, in this future state experience, one customer I remember saying, how amazing would it be if I was on my couch and I could just open my phone and just go, all right, how's my solar battery doing today? And you can see some performance related data. If they're part of the virtual power plant, they can maybe manage some preferences there. The next stage is they get a bill. The transactional process begins. There might be another stage as a different loop or a branch where something might go wrong with the battery. So what do they do? How do they solve a problem? For example, it might be that there could be something wrong with the battery, or it could be that they don't really understand their bill. They might have thought that, oh, I thought when I had this battery, I was going to learn all these different things about it. What's going on? So they need to go and ask for help from somewhere. They might leave. And then what does that process look like? What does that experience look like? What are we designed for? What's important in each of these stages? And so what we had mapped at the top was event levels, the use cases. So use cases being that they're actually exploring or they're researching. We have something we call the moments that matter. So these yellow ones where the moments of matter, I've heard it referred to elsewhere as moments of truth. What that is about is these are the moments in the experience that should you break them, it shatters the whole experience. So I did say I wasn't going to deep dive into this one, so I might just actually jump over the visual one. But you can sort of see that there's all these different sort of levels, and it's really rough. It's just, stacks of post-it notes, reclustering things, reorganizing it. Every stakeholder that we bring in adds, sheds some new light on what this sort of experience looks like. But in its guts, you can sort of see that it's that front of stage, what the customer sees and interacts with. Then there's behind the scenes, which is multi-layered. It's it's the people, it's the teams, the processes. There's partnerships, for example. Like we're selling Tesla batteries, but we don't create them. So we have to have a relationship with Tesla. And that has to be a good relationship. If that relationship is not like a strong relationship, maybe they could just pull the rug and the whole project falls apart because Tesla says, you know what, I don't really want to work with AGL. They're difficult, they're complicated, and we've spent 3 years designing this whole service, and and it all falls apart. So when you start to see things like and expose these weaknesses, you can really start to understand where is it that we should be focusing and solving for. Yeah, so the intention of this slide is really just to sort of show you that, it is a lot of the time it's really rough work until, the final week we wanted to distribute something and showcase it in a proper format, and that's when we digitized it. So we spent another few days probably after this mapping process. Actually, I'll see if I can open this. Actually, I was going to say that's 85 pages of every single research point I was going to show you, but I want to sort of save some time here. But I want to show you this 85-page document of just insights that we were clustering and digitizing. So here's a digital version of the battery service blueprint. Service blueprints, in my experience so far, and in my opinion, they work best on either an enormous screen or in person. This poster, it was like meters by meters. It was huge. It filled my, which you can't see because my background. It would be like bigger than the office I was in, and because of the level of detail. But being a visual artifact, like something that people can walk by, say on the before they go and get a coffee, to be able to walk past and see this and go, oh, that's kind of cool. They start to get some information and sort of whet their curiosity. Really, really powerful artifact. So we talked about the event levels here, and we talked about the moments that matter. So I think I'll just to sort of continue the story of this. I want to show that this first level is like the research we did. We went out to customers, we spoke to them, we understand what does that experience look like, what are those needs, and we started to understand their preferred channels and touch points. For example, when they're exploring and deciding whether the battery's right for them, the things that they rely on are news articles, word of mouth, email, Google search. They use their phone. They do payback calculators. So we can start to expose what are the tools people are using to make these decisions. So I'll look at one of these slices as an example. The moments that matter, determining the value of a battery. I already talked about if you can't, and for a lot of people, if they can't answer the question that the battery is a good choice for me, they're not going to spend batteries are $12,500. They need to understand this is worth their time and their money in order to go ahead with that purchase. If they're going to sign up to orchestration, they need to understand what the hell is orchestration. Why would I do this? If I'm a part of this, am I going to lose something? Am I gaining something? What do I get out of this? They wanted a transparent and detailed quote. For a lot of customers, the language is critical. So these are some of the deep dive insights you can see. So we've got this mapped kind of like it's basically a customer journey mapped. We have all the supporting information around preferences. We have those moments that matter that make or break the experience, and we then have all the insights that support it. So these are the things that helped inform this experience. So for example, AGL are viewed as the experts and natural partners for batteries. So customers expect AGL to be accountable, reliable partners. They're buying the battery from us. So that it's not important to them necessarily that they got it from Tesla, that's a Tesla battery. They expect if something goes wrong, they'll come to us. For example, I trust AGL rather than this is a customer quote here. I trust AGL rather than some whoop-de-doo battery code that throws a price at you that's gone a few years. We found that when you start to do this kind of research, you expose like the history of these problems. What we found was there was a bit of a solar boom in the 90s where solar panels became the new big thing. People were getting them. What happened though in that marketplace was that you had basically what they referred to as cowboy contractors coming in, all these random little project groups starting up and coming in, installing solar, getting it set up and then leaving. And what would happen is some customers would be like, oh, it's not working. Who do I call? Maybe they didn't set it up right. And so for them, they felt really burned by a poor customer experience. And what that did was that shapes their worldview of solar, and batteries are an extension of solar. So they've already got a negative sentiment towards batteries. So the important thing that we have to solve for is building trust and being transparent with how we do things and educating them and being and like this quote indicates, being their partner, not just being someone that sells something to them, because once we sell this battery, we're forming a partnership. And so for them, that was a really, really important aspect of it. They didn't want to just be a transactional, buy a battery, order it on Amazon, bang, it comes and that's it. No, they wanted us to be involved from start to end and support them through that. The way they saw it is it's a really sizable investment. They're spending $12,500. If something goes wrong, they want to know that we have their back. Yeah, and so a couple of these other sort of key ones was so we talked about if talking about Nielsen Norman before, one of his principles for design, visibility system status. That was something that came up really strongly in his research. Customers want to know that when they with their battery, they want to know what's happening with it, where am I at with it, if like what kind of benefit am I getting from this? I've got this system and it's installed now. How do I know it's working? How do I know that I'm actually, saving money or storing energy? I need some way to communicate to me that this is what I'm getting. And another really important one is we talk about this trust. Customers are going to hold us to our word. We understand that there's a really important that what we say to them, what we say we'll do, what we say we do. So let me start that again. What's really important to customers is that we will do what we say when we say it. A lot of them have burned experiences where they're waiting months without getting support, and so it's already a really burned industry. So for us to come into this and design a service, we have to be conscious of all these factors. If we come in and just expect that they're going to come and trust us and buy it, well, then we'd be completely wrong. So we have to really design an experience that builds that trust and really supports them throughout it. So we start to get this really deep, rich layer of the customer and the customer insights here. What we did then is we walked all these different stakeholders through, these experts in energy, these infrastructure, like digital infrastructure experts, engineers and whatnot, to come through, and we explained this customer experience through them. And what we showed them is we said, this is the ideal experience that we need to achieve these moments that matter, and we need to address these needs for the customers. What would we need to do to be able to do that? If customers want a digital onboarding experience, what do we have today? What are we going to need to do to achieve that? And so we started to get some insights from stakeholders. For example, what we found was customers actually wanted site inspections. They wanted, when they were purchasing a battery, they wanted a consultant to come to their home, have a physical inspection of it, have a look, get everything right, because they'd been burned in the past. So it's really about that personal touch. What we found from a business and organizational perspective was it's actually expensive for us to send a technician out to them just to do a quote. And so it's every site inspection was costing over $120, and 85% of the time it results in a requote because we don't have all of the technical information up front. So if we send them a quote online, we're going to have to go out there anyway. So what we ultimately landed on was, how can we adjust our prices then so that we can give customers a flexible option, so that if we get it wrong or they don't have all the right information, it's not going to cost us more, and it's not going to cost them more. And so what we did was we looked at, we talked to different the marketing teams and the pricing models and adjusted those. And so those are some of the results from that. And so whilst we start to illuminate this, ideal customer experience, we start to unleash some of these, or unlock some of these insights into some of our systems and processes just really aren't good. These teams don't talk to these teams. We have all this data and we're not doing anything with it. Or, here are some potential battery providers, but we haven't got any partnerships with them. And so you start to see that there is just all these different sort of components. So if we talk about the rose, thorn, bud again, blue's the thorns, green's the opportunities, and then pink is the things we have. So if we looked at this ideal future state experience, we didn't have a lot of things ready to go. A lot of things were opportunities that we could work on. A lot of things weren't working and we would need to replace. And so when we bring a whole project team around this, people can really start to understand like, okay, we've got a lot of work to do. Like, it's not just about creating a pretty app. It's not just about creating beautiful screens. We need to get these, our back of house processes in order to actually enable this experience. Um, I'll leave the blueprint there. And I just want to show you the final thing just to sort of wrap up for me before I jump into questions. So one of the challenges of being a service designer is that sometimes you don't really see the end product. You get to create these beautiful visions. You help the team organize and align and to prioritize, and then you set it up, and then you go in, and it goes, you ride off into the sunset. What I did with this project, I was really passionate about it, and I decided I kind of had a pretty flexible role, and I went and worked with the user experience team in helping translate all of these service design insights into actionable recommendations and helping the teams realize this vision. So this is the app we won the. Hopefully my sound will pick up through this. Otherwise, it's okay. It's just some jazzy music. This was the promo we did that we've shared internally to showcase the new UI and UX we'd created for this. And what you're going to see here is some of the features that if we go back here, the UX team as a priority decided to look at check-in. So we looked at basically managing your preferences and being able to see your data. Because for us, we felt like from extensive workshopping and based on customer research, we decided that the most important thing for people when they first sign up and have a battery is they want to be able to see that it's working. They want proof that they want to know that it's working and that what they're paid for, they're actually getting something out of it. So the first point of call for us was to create a great experience that could showcase that and give insights and data. So let's see. Can you see that? Is it the video is playing? Cool. All right. Thank you. Any questions?